Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, I'm Vincent. I'm your host here at Shape the System. Today joined by Jessica Kung-Dreyfus. I think I've got the Kung bit right. Welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you so much. Delighted to participate.
Yeah, it's and there's a huge amount that we're going to talk about today, and we haven't got maybe even enough time to do it justice. But what I wanted to first sort of dive into was this idea of ornamentation and design. Now, I'm going to be pretty green in this, so I'm going to need you to sort of step us through it. But let's dive straight into this topic that you're really focused on right now.
Yeah, sure. I guess I would love to start with just when you hear the word ornament, what comes to mind?
There's probably two things for me, because I was actually been thinking about this in sort of prep for it. One being like an object in my home, like maybe an object in my mother's home, maybe more than my home. So something that has some age and some kind of permanence to it. And then I think of the kind of flourishes you might see. I think I remember when I went to Gaudi, to the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, and that place, felt like there was a lot of ornaments there. I guess those are the first two things.
I love it. I love it that you came up with Gaudi, because I feel like he's probably like the apotheosis of ornament. That's recent enough that it's still within the contemporary consciousness.
Okay.
And with the Sagrada Familia still being built, it's like, I think that's a really good, great.
Oh,
and
good.
so, yeah. And so there's many different types of ornament. When you think of Gaudi, you're thinking about architectural ornament, right? So
Sure.
Specifically ornament that is in a interdependent relationship with the built structure. And so you can't, if you look at the Sagrada Familia, you really can't take the ornament away from the building. It's like, where does the ornament start and the church begin? It's interwoven into the experience of the magic of the place.
Sure.
And so when you say object at home, do you mean like a specific like Christmas tree ornament or like a beautiful statue? Like what comes to mind what picture do you have?
There's a bunch of there's a room in my parents' house, the house that I grew up in effectively, and this room is kind of the sitting room, I would guess you would call it. It's kind of a relatively large room. It used to have a grand piano in it, not ours, but someone had left it at our house because we had a big enough room for a grand piano. And then there's just a lot of stuff in there in that room. Not even that much, just things like my mother's father was a pharmacist, and in his lifetime, which would have been in kind of the 40s, they had a bunch of the glass bottles that you have where the lids have been actually kind of, sanded down to fit the particular bottle that they're going into. They're kind of a stopper type thing. And they've got this kind of flourished kind of, labels that are on them that have whatever substance was in them at the time. There's these kinds of things, and there's things that, my mother's mother had, like a little red cup that she always had her cup of tea out of it, and it has all these flourishes all over it and all this kind of stuff. So it's a room that's filled with those kinds of objects that sort of, for me, says ornaments.
That's perfect. I think I'm impressed by those two types of, you can say, archetypes that arose in your mind. And the key word that I'm getting from you is flourishes.
Right.
And that's definitely one of the hallmarks of ornament, is that it follows you can say, biological systems through which things go from seed to flower. And so the systems, Fibonacci sequence, other sequences that define growth, whether it be how crystals are formed or how trees grow, are the biological systems that inform ornament design. So it's a beautiful thing that you see those flourishes throughout your home, and Gaudi's church is certainly flourishing.
Right.
And another key idea about ornament is that what's so unique about it is that it's not self-standing. And so in today's day and age, where it's really about the genius architect or the genius artist who comes up with their own sort of freestanding sculpture or iconic sculpture, like that makes them famous. Ornament is really not about personal expression. It's not that it's the suppression of it, rather it needs to be held. So ornament needs a holder. And so when you describe the cup is the holder for the flourish that you love, that reminds you of your mother, right? And Gaudi's church holds the ornament, the flourishes that become, the incredible ceiling and other things.
Interesting. And just actually focusing on that Gaudi example, like I remember being in it, and the explanation that the way that the trusses, I don't know if that's the right word from an architecture perspective, but the base, these roots that effectively go up to the ceiling and then they sort of branch out into the ceiling, and they're effectively like an upside down tree holding the ceiling up. And as I understand it, they're derived from nature. There's actually an organic form to these. Is that like the kind of expression of ornament in this context?
Yes. And so that the famous picture of the nave of the church where you see like these incredible trees growing up into the flourishes, that's a perfect example of, you could say, going from seed to trunk to branches to leaves, and the process of foliation and ornament. So it's rather than, let's say, a contemporary solution might be a green wall in a church, right? But what's so powerful about ornament is it's not putting nature in a building, it's the sublimation of nature. Right. It's the interpretation of natural systems integrated, inseparable from the built form, the human creation.
And so we're using examples in architecture at the moment. That's a big part of your background, and we're going to get to that a little bit later on. But take us outside of architecture, where else, I gave an example of a cup, but where else are kind of the hallmarks of where we typically experience, ornamentation? Am I saying that right? Ornamentation?
Ornament. Ornament and ornamentation would be, I guess, the act of ornamenting something.
Yeah. Where else are we seeing this?
I mean, I think the most common would be tattoos.
Right.
And so when I look up the hashtag ornament in my Instagram, it's almost all tattoos.
Really?
Yeah. It's just fascinating. And so it's not architectural ornament, it's tattoos. And it's actually quite profound that it's tattoos, because for two reasons. One is the Chinese word for ornament is wen shi. And the wen is ornament. Shi would be like, the thing that holds it. And wen shen is body. So wen shen is ornament for your body. It's the same word in Chinese. And another reason why it's very interesting that tattoos would fall under ornament of the body is that ornament lives at the edge, right? So
you said it's sublimed into the thing that it's a part of, or a vessel too, but it actually is on top of that. And like how much
it's an edge dweller. And so when it appears in buildings, it appears on the edges of things. So it helps to navigate the transitional spaces between roof and sky. So you often see ornament, on the roofs, or you often see ornament on the frame of a door or on a mantelpiece, because it lives on the edge. And so tattoos live on the edge of our bodies, right? The skin. Right. And so in some way it helps many people navigate their edge. It helps them. People put tattoos on because the thing that makes people want to get a tattoo is similar to this deep need that we have to ornament buildings, right? Which is that we want to say, this is something special. Something really powerful happened. I want to tattoo it on my body, or this is what symbolizes who I am. And so you put that on your body. And so that need is very similar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like the other one that sort of comes to mind is like I've done a limited amount of classical music study, and they always described Baroque, which is one of the kind of three main eras of music, as being heavily ornamented music. There's all these flourishes and, that happens at the end of the music. I guess it was an entire music form that was, its largest form of expression was this flourish and ornamentation that happened as part of music, like you're thinking Bach and these types of composers. So it's even in that form.
Yeah, that's a brilliant. You're making brilliant connections. So I just was in conversation with my old mentor of mine, Kent Bloomer, who's been teaching ornament at Yale for many years, and in the conversation, he specifically used the example you just said,
Great.
which is in Baroque music. That's an example of ornament in music, exactly what you said, and that rhythm doesn't ornament the music per se. What it does is it ornaments structures within the music.
Right.
So it ornaments rhythm, right? So you can have a basic rhythm, and the rhythm gets ornamented.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the structure of the song itself isn't fundamentally changed, but Johann decided needed to go on the end of the note that otherwise would have just been dirt. So just coming back on this, because there's a few expressions of this form of ornamentation. Most of the examples we've just talked through are hundreds of years old. What's happening then that's not happening now?
Oh, so there's a big giant thing that happened called modernism.
Right.
and
we're going to be here a while.
Yeah, we're going to, no, it won't be. It's not, it's very short, right? So
okay, cool. Perfect.
You could say that industrialization brought a lot about efficiency and excess, right? And so ornament got lumped into that unfortunate bucket of excess.
Right.
Extra material, extra labor, extra cost. And so the economy of scale, the economy of, you can say, how to become more efficient in the construction of buildings, right? And so that's one very powerful argument that was used by Adolf Loos and other theorists to call for the annihilation of ornament from modern structures, right? So in the definition of modern, part of that definition was eliminating ornament for all the reasons that it also was this old language, and moving towards a new architecture was this sort of revolution in aesthetics and consciousness of the time. And so to create that break is part of the defining gesture of modernism, is the elimination of ornament. So
interesting.
We're living in the legacy of modernism and the white box.
Right. And this was like, when was this? When did this sort of movement start that led us to where we are now?
Adolf Loos, his lecture was in the 1920s. And so it was right around the development of the Bauhaus in Germany.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. And look, and do you think, what I'm assuming then it sounds like the movement of modernism around architecture sort of pulled other things along with it in terms of the way we approach structured design and even creative expression. Was architecture leading this, or was it something that led architecture there?
Oh, well, I'd say I would say it's World War I.
Right.
there is ornament is part of the human spirit. And I think it's very hard for us to understand. When I was studying sort of art and architecture history, it's hard for us to understand the effect of the trauma of those world wars on the human psyche.
Right.
And so something about what havoc that wreaked on not being able to cope in some way. It's like, well, we need to really reflect on what makes us human, and perhaps we can't look at it, and we have to reassess the human condition. And so I think the world wars were a huge break, psychic break in human history that led to modernism.
Right.
And no, I don't think the movements in architecture led that. I actually think I can't get beyond James Joyce. Maybe literature. It's hard to point to a specific moment.
Right.
That's the thing about movements. They move through. But Ulysses is like one of the first quote unquote modernist novels as a real aberration from traditional narrative structures.
Right. So there was a connective tissue between architecture, music, the art of the time, and I think there was. I mean, I'm not schooled enough in art to understand this fully, but it all sort of emerged that this kind of shift away from ornamentation and ornament and flourish and everything that comes with that, and then that sort of brings us to, and we're still in this now. We're still in a period, largely shaped by a desire to be as scaled and as efficient as possible in the delivery of, in of a lot of forms, architecture as being one of those, but, our everyday experiences typically are in the built world, but even in the digital world. So that modernist kind of thinking and approach is still influential in all of that. Is that correct?
I think it's more than correct. I think it's totally accurate.
Right.
I think that modernism has become modern, and its baseline is what we have now. And what the result is, most people don't know what ornament is. Like the annihilation is so total that we live in a world post ornament, which I find very ironic, because Adolf Loos, who actually wrote an essay called Ornament as Crime. His architecture actually still had ornament. Like, he didn't actually take his advice himself, like literally. Like, I don't think they could actually imagine what the glorious white walled future was. I mean, they romanticized it, but what its actual implications were, how could they know, right?
Right.
But the fact that we took it to the extreme, to a point that he probably could not have even imagined, or might have disagreed with actually in practice, is the legacy of the world wars and the 1920s and 30s. That is, I think, a huge part of why we live in these placeless places.
Yeah. And so, I'm good.
No, that's all.
Yeah, I was just going to. So, this setup's wonderful, because what I would really love to understand now, because at the core of what you're doing and teaching, the consulting that you do and the processes that you take people on, I'm not sure the best way to describe it, is about trying to get people back to this mode of thinking, or to use this thinking in how they think about designing solutions or designing anything. Can we segue into that? I want to understand how you're now engaging people to rethink this kind of white wall, as you just called it.
That was brilliantly put. And so what we're left with in this post-ornament world is no way to navigate the edges. Right. And so ornament functioned as a way to guide us through positions of transition and transformation, right? And so there are these pre-existing, you can say, forms, geometries.
Sacred geometry. These are sacred geometry.
They're sacred. They're sacred geometries. They're sequences. They're visual languages that are code, basically, for how you navigate edge conditions. And so whether you're prototyping a new invention, or coming up with a new school, or anything that is being birthed, you're constantly navigating an edge condition. That's just part of the creative process. And so ornament, you can say, if you look at history, it's like 90% of what we look at has ornament on it. And so the fact that this knowledge was lost leads us, and the consciousness of it has been lost, you can say, has led to many, many places of disconnect that are apparent in our culture today.
Right. And does this essentially mean that when people are going through a design process, and I think the kind of the baseline for that now is kind of this design-led thinking, and we talked about this prior to the interview, that there's something that's missing in the way that they're approaching that design and the way of thinking about something, or that when they come up with a solution, it still feels sort of empty and kind of placeless, to use the word you used earlier, and such humans aren't connecting with the resulting solutions as well, because it just doesn't feel as natural to us. Is that the disconnect here?
So you can trace this disconnect. It's farther back than 1920s. You can say you can really trace it back to Descartes and the Enlightenment, where the elevation of the empirical and the rational. Descartes in the 1600s coined cogito ergo sum, like I think, therefore I am, which has really become the foundation of modern thought, and I would call it conceptual design processes. So this idea that the baseline for any design, if really is, I think of the AutoCAD page, like it's a hash, which is a Cartesian plane, and it's an abstract space. And so this idea that you are the sole creator, independent genius manifester that just evolves this idea is not And this idea of this obsession with new ideas and newness is antithetical to the consciousness of ornament.
Right. So you're, in a sense, what in a practical sense, what you're doing then in the course is to get people to understand that so much of the design process and thinking about the just creation generally, whether it's an artistic creation or a software solution or the built environment, can be rooted in looking at things from hundreds of years ago that have emerged organically, maybe in nature or maybe through our own creation, rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah, it's this idea that things start with a blank sheet of paper, which is quite the opposite of ornament. Ornament is a organic, co-created condition. Ornament, the essence of ornament is co-creation and collaboration between the holder and the held.
Right.
And it arises through this dynamic of listening.
Right.
And so I've sort of adapted cogito ergo sum to es ergo sum, which means you are, therefore I am, instead of I think, therefore I am, because ornament at its heart is relational. And so many of the problems that we are observing in our world right now, whether it be climate change or others, have to do with the fact that it's not relational. It's always about how we can get ahead rather than what is best for the whole.
Right. Interesting. And so when you're I'm looking through some of the aspects of the curriculum that you're teaching, and a lot of the people, that's a very varied group of people who come in to take this course and curriculum with you. But some of these exercises relate to, logo design and drawing, and help me understand how that helps someone to connect with ornament rather than just, the opposite, the absence of ornament.
Oh, yeah. So that's a great question. So you can say a logo is one example of ornament that people understand, right? But what's the result of having annihilated ornament is that we're left with the pieces of what the greater picture was. And so the logo is now this self-standing thing on a white sheet of paper.
Right.
Whereas it's like cutting a gargoyle off of a church and putting it on your desktop. And so I use it as a jumping off point for people because people don't know what the word ornament means, but they know what logo means, right?
Right.
And so it's a way for people to connect to the consciousness of ornament through something that they use and want to make. And so then we can go through an ornament design process to achieve a logo design or to end up or to somehow arrive at it organically without really making it a freestanding thing.
Right. And so it's coming from a place of, that has pre-existed rather than, as you said, the blank sheet of paper. You just before talked about an ornament design process. Talk me through that a bit more.
Oh, so it starts with, there's a couple different ways. Ornament is a response to an edge condition. Mm-hmm. And so I think of, what I think of when I think of ornament design is I think of watching Kent Bloomer. For the first time, I saw him go to a site and search for an edge. It was fascinating, right? It was like, where do I ornament? And I thought he would choose the front, or I thought he would, because it was this beautiful campus in Shanghai, and he was we were invited to sort of look for site for ornament, right?
Within this building?
It's not a building, a campus. So there's infinite surfaces, right? He could have put a big entrance gate. He could have put, all sorts of sites. And so what he looked for was the place, there's many different ways to design, but he specifically looked for a holder that really needed help. Right. So just the way a doctor is looking to heal something, he was looking at this container, the architecture, and he was looking where it was most in need of service. In other words, where there was problems, where there was problems. Yeah, where there was the least amount of harmony. And so where the ornament would create so that the problem would become an opportunity and a place of beauty.
Where was that?
And so in the center of the campus, there is a black box theater, but for some reason, they decided to put the HVAC on top of the theater. And so all around campus, instead of a beautiful roof, all you saw was HVAC on top of the roof.
Sorry, what's an HVAC? It's like an air conditioning unit.
Yeah, air conditioning unit. And so it's just this horrible
the ultimate ornament.
Terrible eyesore. And so the roof is such a beautiful edge, right?
Right.
And so he chose that edge as, because you have, so to answer your question, it began with a search for a holder.
Right.
The ornament needs to be held, right? And so he was looking for a holder. After finding the holder, what starts is you try to identify the seed.
Right.
So what's the seed geometry that effloresces along the holder? And so I watched Ken do a lot of research into the mission vision of the school, also the Chinese culture. And so we were looking at Chinese paradigms of seeds and keys. And one of the paradigms was the dragon and the phoenix. So we looked at keys that were based on dragons and the geometries of dragons expressed throughout Chinese culture, and then really developing those geometries and having them flourish through the holder.
Right.
So identifying the holder and then identifying, you can say, the system of efflorescence.
Yeah, and you used that word just before. Just for mine, what does that word actually mean? Sorry.
Efflorescence?
Yeah, what's efflorescence?
Flourishing. So when you said flourishing,
oh great.
When you said flourishing,
I'm all about it. I love it, flourishing.
You're all about it. It's something that flourishes.
So just to close out on that wonderful example, so we took an HVAC, a air conditioning outlet unit thing that was in the middle of the campus, visible to all, horrible, and what resulted in that space or in that hold, as you call it, what was the impact of that?
Oh yeah, that's great. And so he ended up designing. The Bloomer Studio ended up designing a Dragon's Gate and then a puzzle ball. So one of the beautiful objects in Chinese culture are these beautiful balls nested together and impossibly intricate.
Right.
And so the studio developed a modern version of that ornament.
Right.
And integrated dragons and phoenixes and figured out how to place it on top of the theater, including building a gate to the theater, which really brought together Chinese traditional ornament with modern architecture. It's just brilliant. I mean, I think it's a brilliant piece.
I love it. I'm gonna have to link to some photos of it so people can understand how that transformed that. And my guess is that people's affinity with or relationship to both the building and the space changed because of that as well. Would that be fair to say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It changed something from an eyesore to an icon. Right. Eyesore to icon.
I love that. All right, we've absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
This is absolutely fascinating. Just total side note on this. My company when I was in San Francisco was a financial tool for consumers. But when trying to do the logo, I said to the designer, I want people to already feel like they already know this form and this shape. And I instructed him to actually go and look into Mayan characters because I thought there was a permanence to them. They'd been around for so long that people would organically feel like that they were familiar. And we ended up modeling the logo to have its own meaning for us in the form that we needed it to take. But it had hallmarks of the way these kind of characters are formed, and it worked. People used to say to us, I know you guys, I've seen you around, or it feels familiar, I've heard of you before. And I'm like, I think it's a visual attachment to the shape. It looked like a tattoo in some respects. So I don't know, maybe organically having done this in a past form.
So first of all, that's a brilliant thing to tell your designer because you actually had him start at a different place than he would have started.
Absolutely.
Because when you said start with something familiar, that meant that he went to existing design paradigms.
Right.
And so rather than try to come up with something new, you said, give me something old.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's great. That's a huge place to start. And, ornament is familiar. It feels like home. It feels like something that people already know. And so you definitely gave that instruction.
Yeah.
I'd say that as I'm bringing this into my practice, one huge shift that I've been finding is that rather than be the designer that gets the assignment, I find myself co-creating with the client. And so I lead these, I don't design it for them. I actually teach them how to design their own, and they're not my students, they're my clients. And so
Right.
through facilitated workshops, it becomes, because nobody knows what ornament is, right? And so you have to simultaneously be instructed while you create it for yourself.
Right.
And so becomes a collaboration whereby they design their own logo. I mean, that's what's been happening.
Yeah. And then obviously that informs so much of how they think about
Oh my
their
God.
design generally.
It's amazing. And so I take them through the design process, which is a process of personal discovery. So it's a transformational process as they discover who they are. And then we co-create. It crystallizes. There's a moment when it crystallizes into, you can say, that seed geometry, which could then find a holder in their building and in different parts of their company. And then it can flourish, right? And so just helping them, guide them through that initial process.
Yeah. And so how did you end up here? How did you end up I mean, I've read a bit of your background and I'm not going to paraphrase that, but what was the journey for you to arrive in this place, helping people to understand and unlock this ornament thing? Like, what's your backstory?
Oh, it's funny, right? So I became a yoga teacher when I was still in college at Yale. Okay. So it was it was before yoga was super popular and there weren't that many people doing it. And so I started a on-campus group and I wanted to write about yoga and architecture for my senior thesis, specifically how models yogic ideas of the body and space applied to architecture. Right. And they really didn't want me to write about it because it falls out of the modernist canon. Right. And so when the person who was leading the senior seminar to help craft the abstracts that then gets submitted to the dean for approval, she basically was like, she actually said, Jessica, could you just write about Le Corbusier?
That's what we already know that we're comfortable with.
Exactly. I was like, well, who needs to write any more about Le Corbusier? I mean, it's so beaten to the ground. Right. It sounds terribly boring and not useful. Sure. And later on, after the thesis became a success, she was like, look, the reason why I said that was because that's the only way I knew how to help you. So it didn't come out of wanting to suppress me, but rather not knowing how else to help me.
She was like challenging you to go and do something other than that by saying, go and do it. Was that what was like reverse psychology? Am I reading
Maybe, but it certainly worked.
It absolutely sounded like it worked.
But then when I wrote my abstract, they tried to, it went all the way up to Robert Stern, apparently, all the way up to the dean. And it was like, Jessica, you can't write this. And I was like, what?
We won't publish it. Sure.
Yeah, we can't let this happen at the Yale School of Architecture. This is not going to happen. This is not going to happen. And so what ended up happening is they sent me to Kent Bloomer. And so the director of undergraduate studies sent me to Kent Bloomer, and I walked into his office, and the first thing he said was he looked at me and he said, they send me all the crazies.
No, wait, Kent was the one who is the study of ornament.
He's been teaching. He lives this amazing life where in a school of modernism, which is defined as being annihilation of ornament, he's the person that teaches ornament, right? So they send him all the aberrants, all the aberrations of the system, and so I ended up in his office, and in a single session, in a single conversation, he taught me how to frame my argument. He was like, Jessica, they can't tell you this is irrelevant. Instead of saying yoga and architecture, you just say the body in architecture, the yogic understanding of the body. How can they say that that's not relevant? And so he just taught me how to navigate, which is what ornament does. It teaches you how to navigate the existing conditions.
Right, and the edge cases that you were referring to earlier.
Yeah, and so what was amazing was not only did he teach me ornament, he taught me ornament in practice on like an intellectual, like his arguments, how he navigates is also his work.
Mm-hmm. And then how did that, so this was in Yale, which, geographically East Coast, you're now on the West Coast. There was a whole bunch that happened in there. Like one part of your bio, it said you went and did a 450-day silent meditation. Like what was the arc that landed you in LA, working in the field that you're in now?
Oh, so now I'm in San Francisco. But
Right.
the short
Sorry,
version of the story is my thesis ended up being a big success.
Yeah.
It went great. I wrote a great paper. They gave me a distinction in the major. I got an A. The person that was like, don't do it, ended up using my thesis as an example the next year of a successful project.
Go figure.
So it turned out great. And then after I graduated from Yale, I received a prize, a $5,000 cash prize for
Right.
my contributions to the cultural life of the campus, I was very active in
Right.
putting on art shows, building community.
Mhm.
And at the graduation at Yale, it's like, Yale has a lot of money. They hand out a lot of gifts. It's very nice. and so then I used that to go on a pilgrimage to Tibet. And I saw some incredible structures that I wrote about. And it actually began my next stage of my education, which was in the Eastern canon.
Sure.
So I really dove into the studies of Sanskrit and Tibetan Buddhism and yoga, and I studied those for a decade in depth with the same intensity of my education at Yale, if not greater intensity.
Sure.
And just in the system that I was studying, in the Buddhist system, after you complete the entire curriculum, you don't graduate, you go into a long retreat. Because that's when you practice. Yeah. It's like, that's when you practice all of your tools, because you can't practice them in any other situation, because they're about navigating states of consciousness that are done in deep contemplation.
Right.
And so that was like the culmination of my Eastern philosophical contemplative training.
Right.
And so I hold both traditions very, very happily, and they inform each other.
Yeah, I was going to say, they sound like they complement each other for the, for what you're taking out into the world now and teaching people about. And I mean, we have to be hugely reductionist in 35 minutes to try and unpack that. There's obviously a hell of a lot more to it. How do you see that now taking shape? Like, there's a course that you're running, some of it's online, some of it's, in person, obviously, when times allow for that. This is, for me, I feel like this is, systemic change, because you're changing the way people think about the way they approach the problems that they're solving. Is that the formation of this now? Is that how you're taking it out into the world, or talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's absolutely systemic change. It's changing the structures of your consciousness by creating ways to navigate the interstitial spaces that you didn't know how to navigate before.
Right.
And the tools that I'm using to communicate it I'm calling it an integral pedagogy. So it's really bringing in all the different tools from the contemplative traditions to the academic traditions, and using them to bring forth this ancient wisdom into contemporary practice. Yeah. And in terms of how the Western led to the Eastern, I really ground my education, the Western, in the quadrivium, which is the foundation of Plato's Academy. And originally, the meaning of the liberal arts is arts that teach you to be free. Right. And so,
in terms of freedom for how you think and how
liberal arts is how can you be free? And for me, like, that training is what allowed me to go into my contemplative traditions, which is the search for freedom.
And then, like, in terms of like what you're, I guess I'm trying to work out how to say this. You're in what you're doing, you're now seeing and talking to a huge range of people across a whole range of disciplines. And you talked before about the kind of co-creation that's happening with them in this kind of, this seed form, in terms of it could be their logo, it could be some other thing that they're contemplating or design, a problem that they're working on. Where are you drawing your inspiration from with respect to that? Is there people who you look to, other than obviously Kent, who's been a massive influence, who are an inspiration to you, or who you think are taking greatness out into the world generally? What's your inspiration?
My inspiration is everyone that shows up in my inbox. Every single collaborator is an inspiration. I'm inspired by their work, and there isn't anybody that I work with that I'm not learning from and inspired by. And so I know that's like a very vague response. Well, it's not vague. It's
specific.
Yeah, it's the people that I'm ended up working with. They run the gamut from entrepreneurs, business leaders, to artists and architects and designers. And body workers. And
what's a body worker? Like someone in a yogic, tradition.
Someone who's a masseuse.
Right. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So from like a billionaire to a massage therapist to.
I love it.
Yeah.
Or a billionaire massage therapist.
That's right. A billionaire massage therapist.
That's probably what I'm fascinated by it. Like, it's amazing. Look, I think that feels like a great place to sort of round it out for today. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, but I'm mindful of your time. Just in terms of something to leave people with, like what's the starting point for people to relate to this? When I first spoke to you and before the interview, I was trying to work out how to attach myself to this idea and had to do a fair bit of thinking for that. For people who are listening, who think, okay, where do I begin? What would you say to them?
I would say look for the edges of things.
And do what with them?
Just look at them.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So just look at your door and look at the edge of your door. Look at your cup. Look at the edge of your cup. Look at your pencil. Look at the edge of your pencil. And then when you see that edge, think about how you navigate that edge. How do you feel when you touch that edge? What does it feel like to walk through that edge?
Right. And okay, amazing. I'm still, we're going to have to come back to it. I love it. I mean, I guess it's interesting. Like just before we do go, that there was a friend, girl I met in San Francisco. I think on Twitter, to be honestly. And she was an artist. She drew, and I was like, talking to her about these big ideas that I had. And she's like, why don't you what can you see right now? And I was like, oh, there's a cup here. And she's like, just draw that cup. And I'm like, really? And she's like, just pick up a pencil and draw that cup. Stop overthinking the magnificence of the thing that you're doing, and find a starting point. And I drew this cup, and it was massively confronting, which sounds odd, but I judged myself in the moment of doing it. I wasn't confident in doing it, but it was incredibly cathartic doing it. Is there an element of that here, which is find a starting point, find an edge, dwell on that, don't feel like you need to output something or create something, understand what is happening at that edge and just go from there?
Well, when you create ornament, you become comfortable with the edge condition, and you become an edge dweller, which is another way to be on the margins of transformation.
Yeah.
And so as you look for edges, you start to be comfortable with the frontier, right?
Being on the edge.
That's what living on the edge. And that's where ornament lives. That's where creation lives. That's the intersection between the holder and the held. And so when you start to stay there, that's where your energy goes. And then that's where thought forms will go. And that's where things will populate.
Creation comes from.
Yeah. And then you'll flourish there along the edge.
I love it. I knew we'd come back to efflorescence.
You just wanted me to say flourishing on the edge.
I just wanted one more flourish.
Okay, you got it.
You got it. Jessica, it was amazing. I'm just wonderfully inspired talking to you. It was really, really lovely. I think
me too, Vincent. Such great questions and amazing insights. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll speak again soon.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.